August 21, 1942, Guadalcanal, the blacked-out fringe east of Henderson Field. The night sweated. Palm fronds leaked rain in slow ticks. Rot and cordite shared the air. From the river flats came a rustle that wasn't wind. Crawling figures, bayonets sheathed, whispering in clipped syllables as they inched toward the wire. Men of Colonel Ichiki's vanguard had rehearsed for this moment in daylight bamboo groves, certain the Americans would meet them with rifles and cold steel. Instead, the first sound was a close percussive slam, not the crack of a Springfield. A second slammed after it, then a third, thunder that lived 20 paces off the ground. Marines of the 1st Division, posted along the sandspit and tree line, worked pump actions by feel. Winchester Model 1897 and Model 12 trench guns, 12-gauge bores coughing 9.33-inch 00 buck pellets at each stroke, a dense swarm at 20 to 30 yards that turned vines and night itself into shrapnel. Reports later noted heat-shielded barrels and bayonet lugs glinting as hands racked slides again. Practical rates of 40 aimed shots a minute in the tightest fights, each blast erasing formation, nerve and direction. The survivors who pressed back into the reeds told of a weapon that devoured distance, a gun that seemed to throw the jungle at them. In the minutes between first contact and the machine guns opening farther down the line, small infiltration teams simply ceased to exist, cut apart before a grenade pin could lift. By first light over the Ilu, the lesson had taken root on both sides. In this damp enclosed world, pellets beat points. A wall of buckshot ruled the space where men could smell each other breathe. The islands ahead would force everyone to reckon with that fact, and with the Marines who carried it. The shotgun's legend did not begin in the jungles of the Pacific, but in the waterlogged trenches of France, a generation earlier. In 1918, American doughboys advancing through the Argonne carried a short, ugly weapon that unnerved even hardened veterans, the Winchester Model 1897 trench gun. Its pump-action design allowed a soldier to chamber and fire 6 12-gauge shells in barely 3 seconds, each shell scattering 9 pellets of 00 buckshot with murderous efficiency across 25 yards of mud and wire. In the close labyrinth of the Western Front, where men fought at the distance of a bayonet's reach, the shotgun became a tool of shock more than marksmanship. German soldiers, accustomed to bolt-action rifles and machine guns, found themselves facing a weapon that turned every sandbag and dugout corner into a killing zone. So fearful was its reputation that the German government lodged a formal diplomatic protest, calling the shotgun inhumane and threatening to execute any captured Americans found carrying one. The protest changed nothing. The trench sweeper had already carved its place in modern warfare. When the Pacific War erupted 2 decades later, the shotgun returned with a new mission, but the same soul. The U.S. Navy Bureau of Ordnance reissued the Model 1897 alongside its refined successor, the Winchester Model 12, both fitted with 20-inch barrels, perforated heat shields and bayonet lugs. Their simplicity was their strength. No delicate optics, no fine tolerances to jam with sand or moisture, only brute reliability. Each Marine company that landed on the coral and mud of the Solomons received a handful of these weapons, officially for sentry use. Unofficially, they became the weapons of choice for jungle patrols and night defense, where visibility shrank to the width of a palm trunk. The men quickly rediscovered what their fathers in France had already learned, that at 10 yards, nothing on Earth matched a 12-gauge. And soon, Japanese patrols in the dark would learn it too. August 7, 1942, dawn broke grey over the Solomon Sea as landing craft ground onto the beaches of Guadalcanal, Tolaki, and Gavutu Tanambogo. The first waves of the 1st Marine Division stepped into a world that seemed to breathe against them. Air heavy with rot, mud swallowing boots, and vines that moved like traps. The smell of salt and diesel clung to every breath. Beyond the open beaches, the jungle closed in, its thickets of mangrove and razor grass sealing off sound and sight until patrols vanished within a few paces. Radios crackled uselessly beneath dripping canopies. For the Japanese 35th Infantry Brigade, veterans of the China campaigns, the terrain felt like an ally. They knew how to crawl low, flank through waterlogged gullies and strike unseen. But they had never faced the weapon the Americans carried slung low and unassuming, a stubby, dark-barreled gun with a serrated bayonet mount and a promise of brutality at close range. As the Marines pushed inland toward the Ilu River, known later as Alligator Creek, the war narrowed to mere yards. In the night, Japanese infiltrators crept through the undergrowth, slipping between foxholes, whispering before the kill. When Corporal William McNulty's squad heard brush crack and saw the faint gleam of bayonets, they raised their Model 12s and fired in sequence. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. 9 pellet bursts of .00 buckshot shredded bamboo vines and flesh alike, erasing the attackers before their grenades left their hands. Marines later wrote that the shotgun cut the jungle open, where rifles only sparked leaves. Spent shells steamed in the rain while silence settled back, broken only by the distant hiss of insects. In the weeks that followed, similar reports echoed from Tulagi and Matanikau, the same sudden thunder, the same stunned quiet. Japanese soldiers began referring to the American bursting gun, a weapon that turned the dark into death itself. The shotgun had found its new theater, not for range or precision, but for dominance in chaos. It became the equalizer in a place where every shadow held a knife, and every heartbeat could be the last. From that baptism of mud and blood, the legend of the jungle shotgun was reborn. By late August 1942, as the fighting along the Ilu River gave way to the grinding battles of Henderson Field, captured diaries and field notes began to tell a new story, one written in fear rather than triumph. Among the belongings of fallen soldiers from the Japanese 35th Infantry Brigade, Marine intelligence officers found passages describing a new American gun that fires exploding bullets. The men wrote of comrades falling in 2 pieces after a single blast, of the jungle itself erupting without warning. To them it was not buckshot, but sorcery, an unseen thunder that struck faster than any rifle and left nothing recognizable behind. In one account, a corporal recorded that his unit was destroyed by a weapon that burst like a mine. These were not exaggerations of morale. They were testimonies of trauma from men who had never encountered anything like the American shotgun. In Tokyo, the Imperial General Headquarters initially dismissed these accounts as the fevered imaginings of men fighting in unbearable heat and fear. Yet as reports from New Georgia and Bougainville followed, the pattern grew undeniable. Entire infiltration teams, trained to slip past defenses under moonless skies, were being annihilated at distances measured in footsteps. The 12-gauge's 9-pellet pattern struck faster than a bayonet could thrust, faster even than a grenade could be thrown. The IJA's doctrine of silent approach and sudden shock, perfected in China and Malaya, dissolved against this wall of instantaneous fire. Soldiers began whispering a new word in foxholes before night assaults, Bakudan Teppo, the explosion gun. By the winter of 1943, Marine patrols noted that night attacks had grown fewer and more hesitant. The once dreaded Japanese infiltrators now preferred indirect fire and distance, launching mortars instead of charges. For the first time in the Pacific, the balance of terror had shifted. The bayonet, symbol of imperial ferocity, had met its counterpoint in a simple American pump gun, and the hunters of the jungle now crept with fear. The technical genius of the combat shotgun was its brutal simplicity. The Winchester Model 1897 had a 6-round tubular magazine and a 12-gauge smoothbore barrel built to deliver maximum effect at short range. One .00 buckshot cartridge held roughly 9 .33 caliber pellets. A single pull sent a tight cone of projectiles outward, trading rifle reach for near certainty inside a foxhole, trench, or jungle trail. Marines commonly carried 36 to 48 spare shells in webbed belts, improvised pouches, or clipped to gear so squads could sustain repeated short engagements. Their notorious feature was the 1897 slamfire capability. With the trigger held and the action worked, the gun could discharge as the breech closed, producing a rapid succession of blasts. Ordnance tests and veterans' accounts vary on deliberate slamfire use, but after-action notes record Marines exploiting the effect for bunker clearing and sudden night defense. Practical fittings reinforced the role. A perforated heat shield protected hands during rapid fire, a bayonet lug allowed close fighting, and a shortened 20-inch barrel improved handling in vines and foxholes. In tropical conditions where finely tuned rifles clogged with grit and moisture, the pump action's mechanical simplicity proved an advantage. Brass-headed buckshot and stout primers kept cycles reliable in rain. Pellets were slow compared with an M1 Garand's 30.06, yet the combined spread and energy at 10 to 20 yards made wounds catastrophic and suppression immediate. Mechanics, ammunition supply and ruggedness turned a modest tube and wood into a force multiplier suited to the confined geometry of jungle combat, changing small unit expectations. Surgeons logged wound patterns that terrified attackers and unnerved entire platoons after close-range shotgun strikes in action. The following section will show how Marines reorganized squads and patrol tactics around that compact, violent power. After Guadalcanal, the shotgun became as common in Marine operations as the Garand or bar. Wherever the jungle pressed close or bunkers hid beneath the palms, the short-barreled pump gun followed. In December 1943, when the 1st Marine Division waded into the steaming mangroves of Cape Gloucester, the weapon earned its place again. Japanese pillboxes camouflaged with palm fronds were impervious to grenades thrown from shallow cover, but a blast of .00 buckshot fired through the firing slit silenced many before the next grenade could be primed. Marines clearing those groves wrote later that the sound of a pump cycling in the dark did more than any order to steady nerves. At Tarawa the following month, the same sound rolled across the shattered seawall. Marines advancing through trenches packed with stunned defenders used shotguns to clear corners still thick with smoke and sand, each blast dislodging resistance left untouched by days of naval bombardment. The weapon's utility spread beyond the infantry. The Navy's Seabees, tasked with building and defending forward bases, adopted it for perimeter security, its reliability prized in the salt, heavy air of island outposts. When the U.S. Army began its return to the Philippines in late 1944, the shotgun followed them ashore. On Leyte, soldiers of the 96th Infantry Division carried Remington Model 11 semi-automatics into coconut groves, breaking ambushes that rifles couldn't answer fast enough. By then, the Ordnance Department had standardized ammunition, 2 3/4-inch brass shells packed with 9-pellet .00 buck or 12-pellet No. 1 buck, ensuring consistent performance from New Guinea to Okinawa. The Japanese soon learned to recognize the signature metallic click of a pump cycling in the dark. Prisoners later told interrogators that even veteran soldiers froze when they heard it. In a theater where distance vanished into undergrowth and fear lived within arm's reach, the shotgun had evolved from a specialized tool into a symbol, the brutal emblem of American ferocity at point-blank range. 3 and 10 words. By the summer of 1944, Japanese field commanders had begun to acknowledge what their soldiers already feared. Frontal assaults against Marine positions were suicide. The old doctrine of night infiltration, moving in small teams to slip past sentries and attack from within, had withered under the roar of the American shotgun. From the Marianas to New Guinea, platoon leaders issued new orders. Attack from range, use grenades, and avoid the Americans' front lines after dark. Some desperate units tried makeshift armor, binding woven bamboo across their chests or strapping scavenged metal plates from wrecked vehicles under tunics. But buckshot, traveling in a dense, short-lived storm, ignored such contrivances. At 10 yards, a single blast of real lead tore through improvised plating, splintering bamboo and bone alike. In after-action accounts from New Guinea's rainforests, Marines described finding enemy dead whose armor had only magnified their wounds. As the campaign pressed through the jungles of New Britain and the Huon Peninsula, reports told of Japanese troops using thicker vegetation as shields, believing dense leaves could blunt the spread of pellets. In reality, the jungle itself betrayed them. Buckshot that struck vines or branches often ricocheted erratically, striking from unexpected angles. Survivors told interrogators that it felt as though the very forest turned against them. Japanese engineers seeking to reclaim initiative experimented with crude flamethrowers and jury-rigged automatic weapons, but their designs were unreliable and their supply lines shattered. Even elite formations like the 18th Army could do little more than launch brief, panicked skirmishes before melting back into the trees. Meanwhile, the Marines had refined the shotgun's purpose into doctrine. 3-man fire teams advanced in staggered arcs, overlapping their spreads of shot like interlocking shields. Each blast cleared not just a path but a perimeter of safety. The balance of the jungle war had inverted. Those who once crept forward as hunters now crawled backward as survivors. The shotgun's battlefield success triggered an industrial response that matched its simplicity. Between 1942 and 1945, American firms ramped up output. Winchester produced over 60,000 Model 12s, while Ithaca, Stevens, and Remington turned out runs of pump and semi-automatic designs to fill unit tables. The weapon's lack of delicate precision parts compared with service rifles meant production lines could be retooled quickly, and stamping and final assembly required fewer specialist tools. Factories moved from prototype tweaks to full-rate manufacturing within months. Ammunition plants matched the guns. Remington Peters and the Western Cartridge Company set brass case production to continuous cycles, shifting away from paper hulls that swelled and spoiled in Pacific humidity. Ordnance directives favored all metal shells for island operations, and the firms cranked out standardized 234-inch 00 and No. 1 buck rounds in batches. Shipping and storage changed to suit the climate. Crates were sealed, desiccants were added, and quartermasters rotated stocks to prevent corrosion. Cost per weapon remained modest by wartime standards, so procurement officers could field scores of pump shotguns to battalions and regiments without crippling spares budgets. On Guadalcanal and later at Cape Gloucester, Tarawa and Leyte, enterprising Marines and Seabees modified gear in the field, sawed-down barrels for tighter handling, oiled cloth wraps to fight rust, handmade sling loops and cartridge pouches lashed to belts. Those improvised adaptations extended service life and utility. The supply chain suffered losses. Cargo sunk to the bottom, storms that delayed shipments, and brief brass shortages that forced rationing. But industrial scale, flexible ordnance policy, and frontline ingenuity ensured shotguns reached the units that needed them. By mastering both the tool and its logistics, the United States turned a century-old firearm into a theater-wide instrument of close combat. Next, we will examine how Marines reorganized squads and training to exploit that advantage in the jungle. By late 1944, the shotgun had become something more than a weapon. It was a sound, a presence, a psychological shadow that haunted the jungle. Combat reports from Bougainville and Peleliu spoke of its effect, not just on the body but on the mind. Survivors of ambushes described the echo of multiple shotguns firing in quick succession, a rolling thunder that filled the confined space of ravines and palm forests. To those under its roar, it seemed less a series of gunshots and more a single living force sweeping through the dark. Marines noted that even battle-hardened Japanese soldiers who had charged machine guns and artillery without hesitation froze when that sound broke the silence. The damage it caused only reinforced the fear, buckshot that tore through flesh so violently that medics could scarcely identify the dead. One U.S. field surgeon on Bougainville wrote that, at 10 yards, a man was no longer a man, he was gone. Japanese medics recorded their own horror. Bodies unrecognizable, faces missing, chest opened by thunder, morale. Officers within the Imperial Japanese Army began warning of a spreading terror of proximity. Soldiers fired blindly when they heard the metallic clack of a pump being cycled nearby, convinced that to wait was to die. Prisoners later confessed that hearing the shotgun before an assault caused panic more profound than artillery fire, for it meant the enemy was already too close to resist. Even among the Americans, the weapon exerted its own strange psychology. The rhythmic pump and blast built confidence, turning exhaustion and fear into a kind of savage momentum. To a Marine pinned in darkness, that thunder was reassurance made tangible, a reminder that they held the closer, deadlier edge. In the thick foliage of the Pacific, the shotgun bridged the gap between technology and instinct, a firearm that killed, terrified, and emboldened all at once. It was fear and power bound together in steel and sound. As the island campaigns unfolded through 1944 and 1945, Marine and Army doctrine evolved to match the close, suffocating terrain of the Pacific. The shotgun, once considered a secondary or sentry weapon, moved to the front of the fight. At Peleliu, where coral ridges hid labyrinths of Japanese bunkers, company commanders integrated shotguns as the spearhead of assault teams. Men armed with pump guns advanced first, sweeping firing slits and cave mouths with buckshot, before flamethrower operators moved in. Reports from the 1st Marine Division described the sequence as shock before flame, a rhythm of thunder followed by fire that cleared strong points faster than explosives alone. In the Philippines, U.S. Army jungle scouts refined the method further. Teams of two alternated between shotgun volleys and short flamethrower bursts, advancing in 20-yard bounds through palm groves and rice paddies. The coordination turned chaotic undergrowth into something navigable, each shotgun blast carving a momentary corridor of safety. The institutional response came quickly. Training manuals from the U.S. Army's Jungle Training Center in Oahu began formally recommending shotguns for engagements within 25 yards, particularly in vegetation too dense for rifle fire. New field exercises emphasized suppression through sound and rhythm as much as marksmanship. Marines learned to fire short, overlapping bursts into likely cover, tree lines, thickets, or suspected ambush sites, forcing the enemy to flinch or reveal movement. It was a tactical evolution built on psychology as much as physics. To hear the pump's metallic click before contact was to know the line had already been broken. What emerged from the Pacific was a new kind of infantry warfare, one that favored simplicity over sophistication. Where Europe had tanks, artillery, and mechanized thrusts, the Pacific proved that in the right hands, a 12-gauge shotgun and disciplined coordination could dominate the most chaotic ground on Earth. For all its terror and tactical brilliance, the shotgun was never a universal solution. Its reign ended where distance began. Beyond 40 yards, the dense storm of buckshot unraveled into scattered fragments, its killing power dissipating before it could reach an enemy crouched behind cover. In open terrain or ridge fighting, rifles and machine guns ruled the day. The shotgun's ammunition, heavy and bulky, weighed down its carriers. 36 shells could tip a man's pack by several extra pounds, a burden that mattered in tropical heat and mud. Constant cleaning was required to fend off rust and fouling. Salt air and humidity worked tirelessly against the weapon's steel. By the time of the Okinawa campaign in 1945, Marine officers had grown selective, issuing shotguns mainly to point men, engineers, and assault specialists who fought at breath's length rather than across open fields. The M1 Garand and the lighter M1 carbine had become the backbone of the squad. Their range and rate of fire suited to the island's shifting mix of jungle, ridges, and urban ruins. Yet even as doctrine evolved, the 12-gauge refused to disappear. In caves, shattered villages, and the claustrophobic interiors of Okinawa's pillboxes, it remained the undisputed master. Soldiers learned to adapt it beyond combat, firing flares, breaching doors, cutting lines and ropes in improvised rescues. Its purpose narrowed, but its symbolism deepened. The shotgun became less a standard arm and more a statement: control, certainty, and finality at touching distance. Even in a war dominated by machines, it preserved something elemental, a weapon that demanded proximity, courage, and raw human resolve. The thunder of its blast reminded both sides that the ultimate struggle was still decided not by steel or circuitry, but by men fighting within arm's reach of death. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the thunder of the trench shotgun did not fade, it merely changed form. Thousands of Model 12s, 1897s, and Stevens pumps returned from the islands alongside the men who had carried them. Some were cleaned and cut down for hunting or farm use. Others were stored away, their walnut stock still bearing the black stains of jungle rot and the faint scent of oil and salt. In post-war Japan, veterans spoke of the weapon with a strange reverence, calling it the gun that killed whole patrols in a second. To them, it remained a symbol of shock, a sound that turned the certainty of their night raids into chaos and fear. American ordnance officers took note as well. Reports from Guadalcanal, Bougainville, and Leyte were preserved in doctrine studies, shaping later manuals for Korea and Vietnam. When the Ithaca Model 37 and the Remington 870 appeared, they carried not just design lineage, but the hard lessons of the Pacific, the knowledge that close quarters control could decide battles where machines could not reach. For the Marines who had fired them, the shotgun became more than a weapon. It was memory made tangible. Many spoke of its recoil as a reminder of survival, of clearing darkness with one thunderous breath. Decades later, veterans could still recall the metallic click of the pump, a sound that meant both danger and deliverance. The war ended, but its echo lingered, the enduring proof that even in an age of mechanization, Victory could still hinge on a man, a heartbeat, and a 12-gauge roar. When the gunfire stopped and rain reclaimed the land, the jungle absorbed almost everything. Blood, bodies, shell casings, but not the echo. That sound endured, a rolling thunder that lived in memory long after the shooting ceased. To Japanese soldiers, it was the voice of dread itself, the noise of an unseen enemy who fought without hesitation, whose weapon could turn the living forest against them. To the Marines, it was the sound of survival, of dominance clawed back yard by yard in a war that offered no mercy. The 12-gauge shotgun did not win campaigns by itself, yet it shaped how men fought and how they endured them. Its short, savage efficiency dictated the tempo of Pacific warfare. Sudden, close and final. Even decades later, veterans could still recall that defining instant when silence fractured and the vines trembled under the concussion of buckshot. For those who lived through it, the roar of the shotgun became shorthand for the entire war, the moment when fear and control met at the length of a barrel. It was a weapon stripped of pretense, its simplicity matched only by its certainty. In the end, the jungle rendered its own verdict, not to the largest gun or the longest reach, but to the man who held his ground in darkness and racked the pump first.